What is the worst experience you have ever had with your neighbor? Next door neighbor was always creepy. He wanted us to always come inside and play with his cats. When he was moving out he offered me an Air Force jacket. I was about 10 at the time. He said if I wanted to get the jacket I had to come with him to get it from some guy's house. After I told him I need to ask my mom, he disappeared. To this day I think he wanted to abduct me. My aunt, who was a single mother at the time and ran a daycare service in her house, lived next to a psychopath. After a bad ice storm one day, my aunt had a bunch of tree limbs fall into her backyard. Her neighbor's husband came over and cleaned it up for her, you know, just being a good neighbor. And in turn, my aunt thanked him with a case of beer, you know, just being a good neighbor. Well, his wife took that as flirting, and so began a one-sided feud against my aunt. It was a while ago, so I don't remember everything. What I remember though was horrifying. She tried to run over my aunt's dog once. Another time she called Child Protective Services and told them my aunt was a prostitute and working at her house during the daycare hours. Probably the worst one though was when my aunt found a bit of her house and grass near the house burned. She's old high school friends with the fire inspector, so he came and confirmed a fire was started using a propellant. My aunt took her to court over these things, but I don't remember what came of it. I'm pretty sure she at least got a restraining order. I once had a neighbor in college that would knock on my door and ask for money. I would just say I'm a broke student and I can't spare anything. It was weird as frick and a weekly occurrence at the least. She was in her 50s and working. One day I got fed up when she knocked on my door. I think I was stressed for exams, and I said, "Yeah, I got some money for you." I asked her to hold out her hands and gave her maybe $2 worth of nickels that I had in a change jar. She never bothered me again. I have a neighbor who did this. I gave him 14 euros and told him that I can't borrow him any more money until he returns my 14 euros. Never heard of him again. I was 13 at the time. He tried to steal my dog and her puppies. He tried to enter our house, and when my mom and I stopped him he told us he could break our necks whenever he wanted. Quite a nice guy. We obviously called the cops after that. What a psycho. Glad you guys did something about him. When I was around 10 years old, my neighbor would occasionally watch me open my mailbox to see if my GameStop magazine had arrived. She would threaten me each time, saying she was calling the cops and that it was illegal for me to check my parents' mail. I actually believed this until I was 15 years old. What a complete see that lady is. We were trying to sell our house and the neighbor's head nephew was sabotaging it. When we'd leave so people could come look at it, he would sneak around just being creepy, which turned off a lot of buyers. He even went into my house during an open house and was telling people not to buy it. These people lived like 100 yards away and we still don't know what his deal was. Once he started threatening my sister, who tried to help him after he passed out on my driveway. She's a nurse. We called the cops and he signed a paper that said if he was caught on the property again he'd be sent to jail. Luckily we were able to sell it after that. This house comes complete with a restraining order against the neighborhood creeps sold. Some 15 years ago, when my parents and I lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana, we ended up befriending one of the neighbors and her 2 kids. Well, one day, we're all hanging out together and I notice her son had some pretty bad bruises and a nice size knot on his head. I kinda shrugged it off and we continued playing. Well, that night the mother comes over and confesses to my mom she killed the boy. She ended up drowning him in the bathtub after beating him severely. She wasn't remorseful at all. When she left back to her house, my mom called the cops immediately and she was arrested shortly after. She vowed that when she got out she'd kill my mom. We noped the frick out of Indiana and moved to another state. Jeez, that poor kid. She intentionally backed into my wife's car because, she claimed, my wife was parked in her spot. That spot was on a public street, in front of our house. The cops saw it differently than she did. My parents' neighbor hurled abuse at the paramedics who had turned up to save my dad's life after he had a heart attack in the bathroom. All because one of the tires was on his front lawn's grass. Lived on the top floor of a drug house in college because it was the only place that would let 7 of us rent together. The first week we were there, the SWAT team did a raid on one of the units. There were 3 below us. They busted in the door and used flashbang grenades on them. One of the other units smelled like urine and constantly had people coming in and out buying drugs. Our keys barely fit in the lock because people had tried to pick them so much. Our cable internet stopped working, so we called the cable company to come check it. The guy took us over to the box outside and showed us 9 different illegal lines that were ripping our internet. I could go on and on. On the plus side, we could shoot bottle rockets in our hallway because it wasn't like anyone was going to call the cops on us. That urine smell was prob them. I heard a really loud banging one evening and walked outside to see a fire extinguisher on the floor and a woman on her phone. I was puzzled, but I put the extinguisher back and went back inside. A few minutes later I heard the banging again and opened up the door to see the woman trying to beat down the door across from mine with the fire extinguisher. Apparently this was the ex-GF of one of my neighbor's friends and she was trying to find him even though he was quite clearly not there. I called the police, and interestingly enough, my neighbor told me she got a DUI that night in an unrelated incident. I was in the process of selling my townhome, so I abandoned my house for a while and moved to another home. Dude took down the fence separating our townhomes and cut down my lemon tree. I was livid. Man oh man, we moved to Florida, and our neighbors there were the most fricked up people I've ever met. Almost too much to get into. They threatened to poison our dog. They threw crap in our yard all the time just to try to get a reaction out of us. They set 2 webcams in a window to watch our house. It goes on and on. One day a shoe landed in my pool while I was swimming, so me, being a 13-year-old kid, I picked it up and threw it back over the fence. I kid you not, they called the police and said I threw a shoe and hit their grandma in the head while she was watering her plants. Almost got me in serious trouble, and to this day I swear we didn't do anything to provoke the behavior that we know of. We were friendly with them at first. Came home to her smoke-filled apartment, called the fire department. When we couldn't find the cause, turns out our downstairs neighbors put a charcoal grill on their stove so they could BBQ indoors. My only relief was a friend had walked my dog earlier that day, so I know he wasn't in a smoke-filled apt all afternoon. TLDR. Buy a carbon monoxide detector. And get renter's insurance, sire. My neighbors had problems. They had constant, nightly blowouts and physical fights. Together but not married, still super on off. Dad was an alcoholic. Cops knew them by name. Once, when we were sleeping, 2 AM, we heard the screaming and cries of their son, my little sister's best friend, and a minute later he's knocking on the door for my mom to help. She pulls him inside and a few minutes later the mom shows up, bloody and beaten up. She asks my mom to lock the door and holds her son. She wouldn't call the police out of fear they'd take the son. So my mom pulled the couch out and made them a makeshift bed, door locked, food and coffee being made while my sister and the son slept while my mom spoke to her and they arranged something. About an hour after they'd showed up he starts kicking our door and screaming. The son is crying. The mom is holding him. My mom fights with him through the door for over an hour till he leaves. My mom arranged for a place for them to stay in a women's shelter an hour or so away and brought them there the next night after he thought they'd already left. She spent 2 weeks sneaking as much as she could to them, his schoolwork, anything till she found an apartment back locally and felt safe to come back. They're still on and off, no longer physically fighting, though they both never stay at his house anymore. Your mom is good people. Retired woman on my street follows the garbage truck and moves the garbage cans off the street while the rest of us are at work, because they are an eyesore. This would be fine except she would leave them in the middle of the driveway and there is no stopping on our street during rush hour. Bus route. So you either need to park a block away to move the garbage can then go get the car or risk getting a ticket while you move it. Since the houses are quite close together we found out the first time by turning in and hitting the garbage can because it was just far enough back that you couldn't see it until you turned. One got the cops called on them because their oldest son was cracked out and got in a huge fight with the mom in the front lawn. Turns out, he was also wanted for armed robbery and aggravated assault. The cops got the wrong house and started banging on our house at 1 AM in the morning until my very irritated father pointed them to the real home. Not sure if that counts because it's indirect, but yeah, it was kinda tamer than the time the girl who lived in the other side of our duplex kicked her boyfriend out but he was tweaking on PCP and literally threw their stove through the crappy wall that connected their kitchen to ours. Fun. We had an old man living downstairs and he was very paranoid. A great quote from him about me is that frickin' bee upstairs is tapping my phone lines. My neighbor loves the song Yeah by Usher. Like, she really loves it. I relive the early 2000s club hits almost daily. I'm sorry, it looks like my mother moved in next to you. My entire childhood was filled with Lil Jon yelling okay, yeah, what? Lived above a guy in a really old fourplex and I guess the wood floor squeaked really loudly when I walked around. It's not like I was stomping around either, but the dude would constantly come upstairs and bang on my door and yell at me to stop moving around. I felt badly for him in the beginning because he seemed genuinely frustrated, but he didn't seem to understand or believe that I wasn't slamming my feet on my floor his ceiling. I called my landlord several times asking him if he had a solution. I couldn't move because I was locked into my lease, but my landlord was just like, buy a lot of rugs. It got to the point that I couldn't take the constant yelling and I was literally either tiptoeing around or hopping from my couch to my chair in order to get out of my living room so that he wouldn't be standing at my door yelling at me. Finally I went downstairs one day and asked if we could talk about the situation because I felt like maybe if I looked him in the eye when he was calm and explained that I wasn't doing it on purpose and that there was literally nothing more I could do. I had already bought Area's rugs FFS. He would maybe understand. So I went downstairs and very nicely explained and he seemed to be listening. And then he said, I'm about at the point that if it happens again I'm going to show up at your door with a really big knife. And then he just stared at me. I basically ran out of there, called my landlord and said that I was more or less being threatened, and a month later the guy moved out. And then as soon as I could I did too. Super crappy situation. In the middle of the night strange noises would come from their apartment, like an owl mating with a German shepherd. In another, if I breathed too heavily, they'd come up and ask me to be quieter. I once told them that I was literally sitting on the couch reading a book and had no idea what noise they thought they were hearing. Another burned something in his oven. Rather than open his windows to get the smoke out, he opened his door to the hall and set off the whole building alarms. We had to all stand out in the cold and wait for the fire department while he watched from his apartment. The fire department opened his windows and told him he was an idiot. We still had to wait outside for them to do mandatory checks of everything to make sure it really was just him being stupid. It was January in New England, during a cold snap. We had neighbors at our old complex that would do this but cook with suey up here heavy spices, then air it out to the common area. It was brutal some days. There was an old woman in my neighborhood when we first moved in that would rip down posters of lost pets, even ones handmade by little kids who wrote in crayon about their lost kitty. It doesn't happen anymore as far as I know, so maybe she moved or died. When I first moved in my house I didn't know my exact property line yet, so I put wood by a tree I thought was mine. Neighbor came over saying it was his tree, so I went ahead and got a survey to settle any troubles. He was P when I got 10 feet beyond the tree. Problem solved though. My mom had something like that. Bitchy neighbor tried to claim half her driveway. The neighbor, though, didn't actually own her house. Her dad was the owner, and when my mom got the survey, it actually turned out that mom actually owned a few inches of the neighborhood's yard. The neighbor's dad was like, I knew it was something like that. I don't know why she's being so nasty about it. Some people moved in a couple houses down. There was a girl around 11ish who lived there and stole my neighbor's dog. She claimed she had never seen it before and thought it was a lost dog, even though 2 days before she had been playing with their dog. They had a terrible relationship. The girl would tell him about her infidelities and then laugh in his face. The guy would then yell about the different ways he was going to kill her. Then they would frick. Florida, not even once. You have been visited by the strong skeleton. He wants you to like this video and have a good week. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.